Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone. I'm just going to walk you through the theory of constraints. It's just another technique uh, of lean management that you probably may or may not have heard of, similar to Six Sigma and other lean management processes. Here's my agenda. I'll go through what theory of constraints is, I'll go through the challenges with it, and I'll give you some feedback where I've seen it implemented. Here's a brief bio about myself. I'm a CPA. I have as equal experience in building financial solutions as I do with reporting and working with data to drive better decisions through all business units and at a corporate level. What is a theory of constraint? Really, what we're focusing on in a nutshell is every organization has capacity issues, whether that's uh, the ability to make a certain product or logistically to ship something out. They're constraints. So what we want to understand is how do we mitigate these constraints? What do we need to do on the production side to improve our capacity or do some product rationalization? What do we need to do in terms of optimization of our shipping routes? And then that takes you down to like the distribution channels of working with your hub and spoke area. So it takes the whole gamut from start to finish. So I'm looking at everything from the point of time that we order the raw materials and to we flow it through to the production cycle to it goes through the distribution channel to the end market. And it's critical to understand this because constraints can hinder or impact profitability, impact margins, and in areas now what we're seeing with the tariffs and overall pricing and concerns with cost and inputs, we want to maximize our earnings where we can through a complete review of our operations. When we're looking at constraints, the challenges is we need to almost map this out in terms of a blueprint. We need to identify the real constraints of that particular area where it's basically the system isn't achieving its goals. There's limits to do it. So it could be the capacity of a machine to produce a certain goods. It could be the fact that we're relying on imported goods coming in from China and we have port capacity issues in terms of that, and that's causing us some backlog issues. We want to make sure when we do any sort of analysis, we make sure that we're doing it overall in terms of investments and other commitments we need to do. The other problem is, and I've been through this with any sort of automation or any sort of that, there is resistance to change. So we have to communicate effectively and work with the stakeholders on how best to address those changes, whether it's automation or with other procedural changes we do, that we communicate it so we can get adoption. We need to balance constraints with other priorities. So when you're looking at the overall operations, we're looking at from the production side to a sales and marketing side, because at the end of the day we have gross margin targets, we have operating income targets, net income, and they're all driven by each line of the income statement and how we balance that. So we want to make sure that whatever we do, decisions we do at the end, our customer benefits it as well as our overall margins. Complexity can cause some issues because depending on how complex your organization, especially your supply chain, how it's integrated and dependent on other aspects from third parties and other things, it may result in us kind of looking at how we look at that in terms of the complexity, whether we how we nearshore or how we do things in house. There's decisions that need to be done. Continuous improvement, like any sort of lean management model, you stress continuous improvement. You should be reviewing all these things so that as we go through the bottlenecks and anything around these constraints, we're identifying and we're not waiting for it to happen. The good news is we have more capabilities now with demand forecasting and other AI tools that can help us identify these bottlenecks and help come up with procedural changes, business process changes that can drive better outcomes. This is just gives you an idea how to identify the constraint. You basically can use decision trees. I typically do these things. I would end up doing a data flow diagram. I would look at that constraint and then I would data flow it out in terms of all the components to it. I would identify where we can get some efficiencies from the resources as well to exploit that constraint. So you're really mapping out every aspects of the characteristics of it. And then of course you're going to elevate. You may end up ranking this stuff too, is when you're looking at the constraint is maybe there's 100 constraints and maybe the top 10 or 20, 15 of them account for the bulk of where the variation is that's causing you with the constraints that's driving the outcome. You may not be able to fix everything because there might be like the low hanging fruit doesn't make a lot of sense. So you want to get the high value items in terms of where you do things, in terms of equipment, additional things where you do it. So it's bang for your buck. So when you're doing your capital budgeting, NPV decisions, and ROI, you're really looking at the best bang for your buck through the total throughput. You can't expect at any time in a culture that you need to constantly to do continuous improvement, and that's what this last point is. Just because you implemented something around reducing a bottleneck, it doesn't mean you shouldn't review that on a quarterly basis to ensure that everything's working as expected, and you have pre-established targets that you're achieving. You can even do that on a monthly basis, that you're achieving those metrics that you define. If not, you should do a review. This just gives you a couple other ideas around cross-functional. I'm a big into that. People a lot of time at a corporate level will dictate policies, but it's the people down at the front level that are driving the production planning, driving the delivery, driving the customer management. That's critical. At the end, it's the customer focus. So we want to do it in an efficient way, but we want to improve our fill rates and our customer satisfaction because that's critical. And as I mentioned earlier, data analytics is helping with us to monitor it. It's helping us with identifying the constraints and helping us make improvements around our demand forecasting, looking at better ways to optimize our operations, and that's critical. And of course, like anything else with lean management, it's a cultural change, and you want to do continuous training and development up to the point that you even have compensation. There's competing different ways to do it. Six Sigma, lean manufacturing, just in time. These are all ways to basically manage things. Just in time's been around for over 30 some odd years. Automotive uses it quite a bit. Anytime where you want to minimize the inventory on hand requires a pretty integrated supply chain. And Six Sigma is just another way to look at things to make sure that each line of your P&L, from your revenue down to your cost of goods sold down to your operational expenses, you're maximizing the value of that in terms of the cost and the return. The key to anything else is resolving the bottlenecks. So as I mentioned, when you identify those bottlenecks, you need to continuously look at those bottlenecks to see if you're getting improvement. Implementing demand forecasting as part of the overall production cycle also works in terms of looking at constraints. Rationalizing SKUs, I'm seeing more and more of this happen now. It just allows you to redeploy assets if you're having an issue with some of these SKUs. What you want to do is, if they're not providing you income and they're causing more issues, like on the tariff side, it just may cause more inputs on constraints, and you want to minimize that. And maybe through product rationalization, you target things that are more profitable and you get rid of some of the low-hanging fruits and just walk away. Continuous improvements is what I discussed before, should always be on your forefront. And I always recommend any solution that you should be looking at health checks and performance reviews. And I always like tying compensation to reduction in bottlenecks and overall improvements with margins. Now, you need to be careful there. I've seen history of where you focus too much on margin. They'll look at different ways through entries or other things on accruals or other ways to manage that stuff, and they may not address the process itself. Here's some contact information, how you can get a hold of me. I do these videos. I try to keep them short and brief. This one will be about 10 minutes long. Thank you.